Observation and research processes. The procedure or phase of observation and study is presented as a circuit that, starting from the initial basis of the physical reality of the event, follows a path whose first obstacle consists of and stems from the use of observation elements and means, data transmission medium, that go from the place and physical reality of the events to our thinking and problem-solving mind, computing. The path of transmission of observed data, or the path of distortion. Well, after the module reality, or the physical set of the event to be studied, we find that for this physical event to reach our mind so we can study and understand it, a medium of information, light, sound, etc., is necessary to communicate with our brain and mind, providing it with data about the event as faithfully as possible to reality. But of course, every medium of communication is imperfect. Referring in this case to the light our eyes receive for observing the event, which is the most common medium of communication, this light has imperfections in its emission speed, in the time it takes from its emission to our brain's observation, etc. And of course, these imperfections and flaws in the information must then be smoothed out and subtracted in our brain and mind according to our knowledge to adjust it as closely as possible to the reality that is or was occurring in the event, thus arriving at a final conclusion that is approximate to the physical reality of the event. Well, within this communication or data transmission path, we can call it the distortion path, since it is here that the transmission medium contributes its imperfections and limitations to the data of the event it transmits to our brain. Observation. According to the above, the observation will be the mental representation module created in our brain with the data provided by the communication medium, for example, a luminous image of data transmission. But as we have said, this information is not entirely faithful to the observed event, but rather carries with it the transmission defects of the medium used, in terms of space, speed, and time. For example, the images of the transmission in our brain, mental observation, were made in another place, farther or closer, smaller, with a microscope, or farther away, with a telescope, at a more or less distant point in the past, etc. That is to say, our mental observation will be riddled with defects produced by the transmission media and its imperfections and lack of fidelity to physical reality. Mental computation. And of course, to find a solution similar to the physical reality of the observed event, we will have to use our knowledge and logical and scientific experience to arrive at this solution, which, although not entirely faithful to reality, will be as close to it as possible. Approximation to the reality of the observed physical event, and once the data from the observations have been filtered, computed, and reviewed, our mind can create images and conclusions that can be, as we say, somewhat similar to the observed reality. Therefore, the more knowledge, deductive logic, ease of imagination, and above all, honesty and fidelity to the search for truth, the greater the fidelity of what is concluded, computed, or resolved in our brain and mind. Shortcomings of relativity and quantum mechanics. As I almost always do, I'll conclude by briefly outlining some shortcomings of relativity and quantum mechanics, and in this case, I'll do the same, of course, but very simply so as not to offend the followers of these theories. Relativity often fails at the beginning of the observation module, as it usually presents postulates such as: an observer on Earth will see time pass more slowly inside the spaceship, and space will pass more slowly for an observer inside a high-speed ship, at the speed of light, mass tends toward infinity, etc., and things of this nature. But what relativity actually does is ignore the limitations of the means of observation and rely on what our brains perceive, without properly processing it. For example, if we were to correctly apply Lorenz's formula, but in a positive way, accelerating our time-lapse observation of what we see when an object moves away from us at high speed, we would see that the same time latency exists inside the rocket, and vice versa if the rocket is approaching Earth. On the other hand, the passage or pulse of time depends on the internal mechanisms of the clock that measures it, and not on the functional time of the cosmos. For example, the passage of time for a person aboard a spacecraft depends on the rhythm of their vital biological elements, and not on the speed of the rocket. Cosmic time is uniform and possesses the property of simultaneity. Likewise, the passage or pulse of time measured by an hourglass, a pendulum clock, an atomic clock, or a mechanical clock depends on the internal structure and mechanisms of the device, as well as on the physical conditions to which it is subjected, such as acceleration, friction, temperature, and gravitational influence. These factors affect the operation of the measuring instrument itself, but not cosmic time, which remains identical and universal for all observers. Why can we assert that real cosmic time is the same for all? Because cosmic time is compact and uniform and possesses the property of cosmic simultaneity. In other words, if, at a given instant t and at a location x, there exists an element at, and at each and every other location in the cosmos there also exist corresponding elements at, and if, at the subsequent instant t, at each and every location in the cosmos there likewise exist elements b, and so on, then all these elements, a and a, b and b, c and c, etc., are simultaneous. Thus, this succession of cosmic simultaneities connects all locations and moments of the cosmos within a single, uniform, and constant rhythm or pulse. In this sense, quantum mechanics may be said to exhibit a certain methodological limitation within scientific inquiry, particularly in computational approaches. Rather than persistently seeking a fundamentally coherent and logically transparent solution, it often restrains the natural human inclination toward conceptual discernment, what might be called ordinary logical reasoning, and instead concentrates on constructing increasingly complex mathematical justifications for quantum formulations that are treated as already established and effectively unquestionable. *I'm including the cover of my book on Amazon, Model of Unification of Cosmic Levels.